What if the story of Jesus and his closest followers isn't what you've always been told? Behind the familiar narrative of a holy teacher and his disciples lies a far more complex and pretty much unsettling reality. You see, the historical evidence that they don't tell you about in church suggests that Jesus chose to surround himself with young boys, not fully grown men, as his closest companions. And these were not simply just students or followers, but participants in rituals and practices that reflect the strange and deeply symbolic traditions of the ancient world. Well, they also reflect the strange and deeply symbolic traditions of some former Catholic priests that have previously made headlines. To be accurate, we could say that there's evidence out there that suggests that Jesus let his Catholic side come out, if you know what I mean. And if you don't get it yet, allow me to bring up the mysterious figure in the Gospel of Mark, a naked youth fleeing into the night as Jesus is arrested. Who was he? And why is his presence recorded in such a cryptic manner? This figure isn't just a footnote. He might be a key to understanding a side of Jesus' ministry that has been obscured for centuries. Today we'll examine these hidden layers of history, questioning what these accounts reveal about Jesus, his mission, and the true role of his apostles. It's time to confront the past with clarity, evidence, and an open mind. In the ancient Mediterranean world, children, particularly young boys, occupied a unique and often symbolic role in society. Far from being shielded from adult responsibilities, they were deeply embedded in the rituals, practices, and traditions of the time. To understand why Jesus might have chosen prepubescent youths, which means young boys that haven't gone through puberty yet, as his closest followers, we must first explore the cultural norms that shaped such decisions. Across ancient cultures, youth, especially boys, were often perceived as pure, liminal figures, perfectly suited for roles that required a symbolic connection to the divine. This wasn't limited to pagan traditions, it influenced Jewish and early Christian practices as well. In Greek mystery cults, such as those of Dionysus and Eleusis, prepubescent boys often participated in sacred rites. Their innocence was thought to bridge the human and divine, making them ideal vessels for spiritual energy. Roman practices mirrored this. Young boys were sometimes used in temple rituals and as attendants to priests, reinforcing the idea that their symbolic purity made them essential to religious ceremonies. While Jewish traditions distanced themselves from the pagan rites of surrounding cultures, they still held on to the idea of ritual purity. Boys often served in roles like assisting priests or participating in synagogue readings, their youthful innocence seen as an asset in religious life. This could be one reason that Jesus decided to recruit young boys to serve him as apostles, as it would align with the cultural expectation of using purity to access the divine. In the ancient world, medicine wasn't just about physical health. It was deeply tied to spiritual beliefs. Healing was seen as both a scientific and mystical endeavor, and children played a unique role in these practices. The belief that the bodily fluids of children carried a heightened spiritual purity led to their use in medicinal practices. Saliva, blood, and other substances were incorporated into treatments and rituals. In healing ceremonies, prepubescent boys were sometimes tasked with preparing remedies, their untainted nature thought to enhance the efficacy of the medicine. The Gospels frequently portray Jesus as a healer, performing miracles that included curing diseases and exorcising demons. This aligns with the practices of ancient healers who combined medicinal knowledge with ritualistic acts. The inclusion of young followers in Jesus' ministry could reflect a practical, symbolic choice rooted in these healing traditions. In anthropology, the concept of liminality describes individuals who exist on the threshold between two states: childhood and adulthood, human and divine, physical and spiritual. Prepubescent boys embodied this liminal state in the ancient world, making them powerful symbols in religious and cultural practices. Youths were thought to have a closer connection to the divine because they had not yet entered the morally and spiritually tainted realm of adulthood. This perception made them valuable in religious contexts, where their presence symbolized a direct link to the sacred. By surrounding himself with prepubescent boys, Jesus may have been tapping into this cultural belief in their purity and liminal status. Their inclusion in his ministry could have been both practical and deeply symbolic. This context reframes the 12 apostles not as grown men of unwavering faith, but as prepubescent youths whose roles were shaped by the cultural and spiritual norms of their time. This understanding allows us to see Jesus' ministry in a new light, one that reflects the deeply symbolic and ritualistic world in which he lived. In the ancient world, healing and spirituality were inseparable, and the practices of medicine often carried ritualistic significance. In antiquity, the act of healing wasn't merely a physical intervention, it was deeply tied to spiritual beliefs and often accompanied by religious rituals. Healers, much like priests, were seen as intermediaries between the mortal and divine realms. Greek and Roman texts describe a wide array of herbal remedies, salves, and elixirs used to treat ailments. These weren't just practical concoctions, they were often prepared with prayers, chants, and symbolic gestures to invoke divine favor. Ancient Jewish traditions, as documented in texts like the Talmud, also incorporated medicinal practices with spiritual undertones. Ritual purity was central to many healing processes. Prepubescent boys were often tasked with preparing or administering medicinal remedies. Their perceived purity was believed to enhance the potency of treatments, reflecting the broader cultural emphasis on liminality and innocence. This role extended beyond mere preparation. Boys were seen as conduits for divine energy, making their participation in healing practices both symbolic and practical. The use of psychoactive substances in religious rituals is well documented in ancient history. These substances were believed to facilitate communication with the divine by inducing altered states of consciousness. The Eleusinian Mysteries, a major religious festival in ancient Greece, involved the use of a psychoactive potion called kykeon. Participants consumed this mixture to experience spiritual enlightenment. Similar practices were observed in Roman cults, where intoxicants were used to blur the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds. One particularly intriguing practice involved the controlled use of venom, such as that from snakes. These substances were sometimes ingested or applied topically in small doses to produce altered states or as part of medicinal treatments. The antidotes for such venoms often required complex preparation, which could involve assistants, possibly youths, who were trusted to handle the delicate process. The Gospels portray Jesus as a healer, performing acts that align closely with the practices of ancient medicinal healers. Understanding the cultural and pharmaceutical context of his time sheds light on the possible roles of the apostles in his ministry. Many of Jesus' miracles involved healing the sick or casting out demons. These acts likely resonated with the medicinal traditions of his era, where physical and spiritual ailments were seen as interconnected. The young apostles likely assisted in these acts, preparing remedies or serving as intermediaries in the rituals. The involvement of prepubescent boys in Jesus' ministry could reflect their perceived purity and their ability to bridge the human and divine. This aligns with the broader cultural norms of antiquity, where youth was central to healing and ritualistic practices. If the apostles were prepubescent youths, their roles in Jesus' ministry may have extended beyond simple discipleship. They may have been involved in the preparation and execution of healing rituals, drawing upon their symbolic purity to enhance the spiritual and medicinal efficacy of Jesus' acts. This understanding reframes the relationship between Jesus and the apostles, presenting them not merely as followers, but as active participants in a complex system of rituals and practices deeply rooted in the cultural norms of their time. The word apostle is central to the Christian narrative, referring to the 12 individuals handpicked by Jesus to carry out his ministry. But a closer look at the original Greek terminology and its cultural connotations reveals that the traditional understanding of the apostles may not align with their actual roles and identities. The term apostle comes from the Greek word apostolos, meaning one who is sent or messenger. In its original usage, the term wasn't inherently spiritual. It referred to someone dispatched with a specific purpose, often involving a task or message of importance. In the context of ancient Greek and Roman societies, apostolos could describe individuals sent on missions, including envoys, couriers, or assistants in various tasks. This functional, task-oriented meaning suggests that the apostles' roles may have been more practical and less theological than modern interpretations imply. Greek writings from antiquity often describe the involvement of prepubescent boys in roles of service, whether in religious, medicinal, or administrative capacities. Their perceived innocence and liminality made them ideal candidates for certain symbolic or practical tasks. Prepubescent boys often served as attendants in temples or assistants to healers, preparing ritual materials or assisting in the execution of ceremonies. These roles required trust, as well as the symbolic purity that boys of this age were believed to embody. The use of the term apostolos in the Gospels may reflect this broader cultural context. If the apostles were indeed prepubescent, their role as messengers could extend to practical tasks, such as assisting in healing rituals, preparing remedies, or serving as intermediaries during Jesus' ministry. The symbolism of youth, combined with their utility in ancient practices, provides a compelling explanation for why Jesus may have chosen boys rather than grown men as his closest followers. In an era where physical labor and ceremonial preparation were essential to religious practices, young assistants could perform tasks with precision and symbolic significance. Their small size and agility may have also made them ideal for specific practical needs, such as gathering materials or managing ritualistic tools. In many ancient traditions, youth were seen as pure vessels, untainted by adult sin or corruption. This perception added a spiritual layer to their practical roles, making them vital to rituals that sought to connect the human and divine. The linguistic and cultural analysis of the term apostolos suggests that the 12 apostles may not have been selected solely for their spiritual potential or adult capacities. Instead, their roles may have been deeply tied to their age, innocence, and ability to perform tasks that resonated with the cultural and symbolic norms of their time. This interpretation challenges the traditional image of the apostles as adult men of unwavering faith, replacing it with a more nuanced understanding of their roles as ritual assistants and symbolic figures in Jesus' ministry. The choice of prepubescent, or little boys as apostles, fits within the broader cultural practices of antiquity, where youth were integral to both practical and spiritual endeavors. This re-examination of the apostles through the lens of language and culture sheds new light on their identities and roles. It's a perspective that invites us to question not just the portrayal of these individuals, but the foundational narrative of Jesus' ministry itself. The Gospels describe the apostles as central figures in Jesus' ministry, chosen to assist him in spreading his teachings and performing miracles. However, when we consider the cultural, linguistic, and historical context, their roles take on a different meaning. By examining their activities and interactions with Jesus, we can uncover the practical and symbolic reasons why these individuals were chosen, and why they may have been prepubescent youths rather than the adult men depicted in traditional Christian imagery. The Gospels emphasize that Jesus handpicked the 12 apostles, but the criteria for their selection remain unclear. Traditional interpretations suggest they were chosen for their faith and potential as leaders. However, a closer reading raises questions about their identities and roles. The number 12 holds significant symbolic value, representing the 12 tribes of Israel. This choice may have been less about the individuals themselves and more about the symbolic importance of creating a new spiritual foundation. Choosing young boys would align with the cultural emphasis on purity and renewal, reinforcing the idea of a fresh start for humanity. Prepubescent boys were often seen as more malleable and open to instruction compared to adults. This made them ideal candidates for roles requiring obedience and adaptability. Jesus frequently scolds the apostles for their lack of understanding, which aligns with the developmental immaturity of youths, rather than experienced adults. Throughout the Gospels, the apostles are described as assisting Jesus in his ministry. While their actions are often portrayed in spiritual terms, many of their tasks align with the practical roles young assistants would have fulfilled in ancient rituals. In Mark chapter 14, verses 12 to 16, Jesus instructs 2 of his apostles to prepare the Passover meal. This task involved logistical planning, which could easily have been handled by younger, energetic assistants. Their obedience and lack of questioning suggest a dynamic more akin to that of teacher and young pupil, rather than leader and adult follower. The apostles are often present during Jesus' healing acts, sometimes participating directly. In Mark chapter 6, verse 13, they anoint the sick with oil and perform exorcisms. These actions mirror the roles of young assistants in ancient medicinal and spiritual practices, where children often help prepare remedies or assist in rituals. The apostles frequently act as intermediaries between Jesus and the crowds. For example, in Matthew chapter 14, verse 19, they distribute food during the feeding of the 5,000. This role aligns with the Greek definition of apostolos as a messenger and reflects the practical tasks assigned to young attendants. The portrayal of the apostles in the Gospels often emphasizes their dependence on Jesus. This dynamic makes more sense if the apostles were prepubescent youths rather than fully grown men. The apostles frequently misunderstand Jesus' teachings and express fear in challenging situations. These reactions align with the developmental immaturity and emotional vulnerability of young boys. In John chapter 17, verse 12, Jesus refers to the apostles as those he has protected. This language implies a dynamic of guardianship that fits more naturally with young followers rather than adult companions. The need for protection and guidance reinforces the idea that the apostles were chosen for their symbolic purity and ritual utility, rather than their leadership qualities. The selection of 12 young apostles would have carried profound symbolic weight, resonating with the cultural and spiritual norms of the time. In Jewish tradition, youth symbolized renewal and a connection to divine purity. By choosing prepubescent boys, Jesus could have been emphasizing a break from the corrupt religious authorities of the time. Their innocence would have symbolized a clean slate, a fresh start for his spiritual mission. The use of young assistants in rituals and ceremonies was a common practice in ancient cultures, from Greek mystery cults to Roman healing traditions. By incorporating this cultural norm into his ministry, Jesus may have been tapping into a broader spiritual framework that his audience would have recognized and respected. Over time, the image of the apostles transformed from vulnerable youths into seasoned adults. This shift likely served to reinforce the authority of the early church, presenting the apostles as mature leaders rather than symbolic assistants. The reimagining of the apostles as grown men would have bolstered their credibility as leaders and role models for the early Christian community. This transformation aligns with the broader trend of shaping narratives to suit institutional needs. The symbolic and practical significance of their youth may have been downplayed or erased to fit the evolving theological framework of Christianity. Restoring this context sheds light on the cultural and ritualistic underpinnings of Jesus' ministry. The portrayal of Jesus in the Gospels emphasizes his miraculous healing, his connection to the divine, and his unique ministry. However, when viewed through the lens of ancient rituals and medicinal practices, many of his actions align closely with the cultural norms and symbolic traditions of the time. The involvement of the apostles as prepubescent assistants further connects Jesus' ministry to these ancient practices, where youth often played key roles in preparing, administering, and participating in ritualistic and medicinal acts. Healing miracles are among the most well-known aspects of Jesus' ministry. These acts not only reflect his spiritual authority, but also suggest a deep knowledge of medicinal and ritual practices common in antiquity. In Mark chapter 7, verses 33 to 34, Jesus heals a deaf man by putting his fingers in the man's ears, spitting and touching his tongue. These actions, while strange by modern standards, mirror the techniques of ancient healers who used saliva and touch as part of their treatments. Saliva, particularly from young and pure individuals, was considered a powerful medicinal substance in Greco-Roman and Jewish traditions. The apostles often accompanied Jesus during healings, and in some cases participated directly. In Mark chapter 6, verse 13, it states, "They drove out many demons and anointed many sick people with oil and healed them." Their involvement suggests they were more than passive observers. They may have played active roles in preparing substances, anointing the sick, and assisting in the rituals. Psychoactive substances were integral to many ancient religious and healing rituals, used to induce altered states of consciousness or as medicinal treatments. Jesus' actions and the inclusion of prepubescent assistants align with these practices. Ancient texts describe the controlled use of snake venom and other toxic substances in rituals. These substances were believed to grant spiritual insight or facilitate divine communication when administered in small, controlled doses. Prepubescent boys were often involved in preparing antidotes, as their perceived purity was thought to enhance the effectiveness of the treatments. The healing miracles described in the Gospels often involve elements that could be interpreted as medicinal or ritualistic. For example, the use of oil in Mark chapter 6, verse 13, and saliva in Mark chapter 8, verse 23, suggests a practical, medicinal basis for the acts. The apostles' presence during these events supports the idea that they may have assisted in the preparation and application of such substances, a common practice in the ancient world. The selection of prepubescent boys as apostles fits within the broader cultural emphasis on purity in ancient rituals. Their youth would have made them ideal candidates for roles requiring symbolic and practical contributions. Ancient traditions held that children, particularly boys who had not yet reached puberty, embodied a spiritual purity that made them uniquely suited for sacred tasks. This belief may explain why Jesus surrounded himself with young individuals whose symbolic value would enhance the perceived potency of his healing and spiritual acts. Prepubescent assistants were often tasked with preparing ritual items, administering substances, and maintaining the purity of ceremonial spaces. The apostles' involvement in Jesus' ministry reflects these roles, suggesting their selection was both practical and symbolic. Many aspects of Jesus' ministry, from his healings to his relationship with the apostles, carry an air of mystery that aligns with the secretive and symbolic nature of ancient rituals. The Gospel accounts often describe Jesus performing miracles in private or instructing his followers to remain silent about his actions. In Mark chapter 7, verse 36, it states, Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone. This secrecy mirrors the practices of mystery cults, where sacred knowledge and rituals were kept hidden from outsiders. The apostles' intimate connection to Jesus and their roles in his ministry suggest they may have been more than followers. They were likely participants in a carefully orchestrated system of rituals and symbolic acts. One of the most puzzling and enigmatic passages in the Gospels appears in the Gospel of Mark, during the events surrounding Jesus' arrest. A young man, described as wearing nothing but a linen cloth, flees into the night when the authorities arrive. This seemingly minor and cryptic detail has left scholars debating its meaning for centuries. But what if this passage, often overlooked, holds a key to understanding the nature of Jesus' ministry and the roles of the individuals closest to him? The story of the naked youth appears in Mark chapter 14, verses 51 to 52. A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. This brief and mysterious account raises more questions than it answers. Who was this youth? Why was he present at such a critical moment? And why is his escape recorded in such detail? Some scholars have speculated that the youth might be an unnamed disciple or even the author of the Gospel, Mark himself, inserting a veiled reference to his own presence at the scene. However, there is no evidence within the text to support this, and the inclusion of this detail remains unexplained. The youth's attire, a single linen garment, aligns with clothing worn in certain religious and ritual contexts in antiquity. In many traditions, linen was used in purification rituals, symbolizing spiritual cleanliness and readiness to participate in sacred acts. Linen garments were often associated with ritual purity in both Jewish and Greco-Roman traditions. Priests in the Jewish temple wore linen robes, as described in Exodus chapter 28, verses 39 to 43. In the context of Jesus' ministry, the youth's linen garment could indicate his involvement in a ritualistic or ceremonial role. The presence of the youth wearing a linen garment during Jesus' arrest suggests he may have been part of a larger ritual or act taking place that night. This aligns with the cultural norms of using young boys in symbolic roles during spiritual or healing ceremonies. The youth's flight from the scene can be interpreted as an act of fear, typical for someone young and vulnerable witnessing an arrest. However, the detailed description of his nakedness suggests more than just a reaction to fear. It implies a level of symbolic meaning. In many ancient texts, nakedness symbolizes vulnerability, purity, or shame. The youth's nakedness may signify his symbolic role within the group or his connection to a sacred act, disrupted by the arrest. Alternatively, it could indicate his role as an intermediary in a ritual, stripped of worldly possessions to symbolize purity or sacrifice. The Gospel of Mark is known for its sparse and direct narrative style, making the inclusion of this cryptic episode all the more striking. The presence of the naked youth raises questions about his specific connection to Jesus and the apostles. The youth's proximity to Jesus during his arrest suggests he was more than an onlooker. His inclusion in the narrative points to a deeper, possibly ritualistic relationship with Jesus. The timing of the episode, on the night of Jesus' arrest, coincides with other significant ritualistic moments such as the Last Supper. This reinforces the possibility that the youth was part of a broader spiritual or ceremonial act. The story of the naked youth, far from being a minor detail, opens the door to a deeper understanding of Jesus' ministry and the roles of those closest to him. The arrest may have interrupted an ongoing ritual, explaining the presence of the youth in ceremonial attire. This interpretation aligns with the idea of Jesus' ministry as deeply connected to ritualistic and symbolic acts, rooted in the cultural practices of the time. The inclusion of this cryptic episode suggests that the Gospel of Mark contains layers of meaning beyond its surface narrative. The story of the naked youth invites readers to question the traditional portrayal of Jesus and his followers, uncovering a ministry steeped in the cultural and spiritual norms of antiquity. The account of the naked youth in Mark raises intriguing questions about the significance of his linen garment. While traditionally interpreted as a mere detail of the narrative, this garment may hold deeper connections to the medicinal and ritualistic practices of the ancient world. Understanding the role of bandaging and its use in healing rituals provides a new lens through which to view this enigmatic figure and his relationship to Jesus. Linen was not just a practical fabric in antiquity. It carried symbolic and functional importance in rituals and medicine. Ancient Greek and Roman medical texts, such as those by Hippocrates and Galen, describe the use of linen bandages for treating wounds and applying medicinal substances. Linen was chosen for its purity and absorbent properties, making it ideal for administering ointments or antidotes. In addition to its practical uses, linen was associated with ritual purity. In Jewish tradition, priests wore linen garments as a sign of cleanliness and readiness to serve in sacred ceremonies, as stated in Leviticus chapter 6, verses 10 to 11. The youth's linen garment may thus signify both a practical role in healing and a symbolic connection to sacred acts. In the ancient world, the preparation and administration of antidotes often involved intricate rituals and the careful application of substances, sometimes with the assistance of youths. Snake venom and other toxins were used in small, controlled doses for medicinal and ritual purposes. Preparing and applying antidotes required precision and purity, often involving assistants who were considered ritually clean. The linen garment could have served as a medium for carrying or applying such antidotes, tying the youth's presence to medicinal practices. Healing was seen as both a physical and spiritual act, and bandages often carried symbolic weight. The act of wrapping a wound or applying a salve could signify not just physical care, but a spiritual cleansing or protection. The youth's linen garment may therefore represent his role in a larger healing or ritualistic act. The emphasis on healing in Jesus' ministry provides a compelling backdrop for the presence of a youth in a linen garment, particularly during such a critical moment as his arrest. Jesus' healing acts often involved physical touch and substances like oil and saliva. The preparation and application of these substances could have required assistance, potentially explaining the youth's involvement. The use of linen in such contexts would align with the practices of ancient healers, who saw fabric as a tool for both practical and symbolic purposes. The youth's presence during Jesus' arrest may indicate his involvement in a ritual or act of healing disrupted by the authorities. This raises the possibility that Jesus' ministry included elements of ritual healing, where assistants like the youth played vital roles. The detail of the youth fleeing naked after abandoning his garment adds another layer of complexity to the narrative. In ancient texts, nakedness often symbolizes vulnerability, purity, or exposure. The youth's nakedness could reflect his role as a pure participant in a sacred act, stripped of worldly possessions to embody spiritual readiness. Alternatively, his flight could represent the disruption of a sacred ritual, leaving him exposed and unprotected. If the garment was being used for medicinal purposes, its removal might have been necessary during the act of healing or ritual. The youth's subsequent flight could then be seen as an attempt to escape after the ritual was interrupted. The inclusion of this detail in the Gospel of Mark is striking, given the text's otherwise sparse and direct style. The youth's linen garment and subsequent flight suggest a deeper layer of meaning tied to Jesus' ministry and its connections to ancient healing practices. The youth's presence reinforces the idea that Jesus' ministry was not solely about preaching and miracles, but also deeply connected to the ritualistic and medicinal practices of his time. The use of linen as a symbol of purity and its practical application in healing adds weight to this interpretation. This account challenges the traditional view of Jesus' actions as purely spiritual. Instead, it highlights the interplay of cultural, medicinal, and symbolic elements that shaped his ministry.
If you enjoy our content, we'd love your support. By joining one of our channel memberships, you help us continue creating videos like this one while gaining access to some amazing perks. As a member, you'll unlock exclusive content available only to supporters, earn loyalty badges to show off in comments and live chats, and enjoy priority responses to your comments, shoutouts, and more. The best part? Memberships start at just $2.99 a month, less than a cup of coffee. Even small contributions make a big difference for the PJ Bible TV team in covering production costs and delivering the content you love. And if you're not ready to become a channel member today but still want to support us, there are other ways to help. Engaging with our videos is a tremendous way to show your support. By taking just a few moments to like the video, share it with friends, family, or on social media, and leave a comment, you're telling the YouTube algorithm to share our content with more people. Your support, no matter how you choose to show it, means the world to us. Thank you for being part of the PJ Bible TV community.